I signed up for the bone marrow registry 12 years ago because Kevin Strauss's daughter had leukemia, and everyone at Station 14 lined up in the break room with a cotton swab and did what firefighters do when one of their own needs something. You put your arm out, you don't ask questions. You fill out the form and go back to work, and you don't think about it again. I didn't think about it again for 12 years. They called me on a Tuesday in February, 6 months into the worst year of my life, when I had $53 in my checking account and a final notice from Ohio Edison sitting on my kitchen table underneath a coffee mug I hadn't washed since New Year's. My name is Nate Calloway. I was 43 years old. The call came from the Be the Match National Bone Marrow Registry, a woman named Sandra who spoke with the careful warmth of someone trained to deliver news that is both urgent and delicate. And what she said was, "Mr. Calloway, we have a patient in need. We'd like you to come in for confirmatory testing. You may be a match." A match, after 12 years. After I had become, in those 12 years, a completely different man than the one who swabbed his cheek in the break room of Station 14 while Kevin talked about his daughter's treatment schedule and tried not to cry in front of the crew. That man, the one with the cotton swab, was a fire captain, 18 years with Columbus Fire, Ohio. He ran a crew of 11, coordinated with the arson division on 3 major investigations, and had pulled people out of structures that should have killed him and didn't because he was good at his job, and because luck, when you are a firefighter, is something you earn one careful decision at a time. That man owned a 4-bedroom house in Westerville with a backyard big enough for a trampoline and a detached garage where he kept a 1971 Ford Bronco he'd been restoring since the year his son was born, a project that would take forever, and that was the whole point. He coached his son's baseball team on Saturday mornings. He made chili on Sundays. He argued with his wife about whose turn it was to call the cable company, which feels like a burden when you're having it and feels like a luxury when you look back on it from a rented room above a laundromat in Dayton, Ohio. The injury happened on a structure fire in the early spring, 2 years before the phone call. 3rd floor collapse. I went through the subfloor and landed wrong, and what the paramedics called a significant L4-L5 disc herniation with associated nerve compression meant I spent the next 4 months unable to stand for more than 20 minutes without the kind of pain that teaches you what the word unbearable actually means from the inside. Columbus Fire's workers' comp carrier disputed the claim. Not because the injury didn't happen on the job, it clearly did, 11 witnesses and 3 body cameras, but because a desk review physician they'd contracted, a man who had never examined me, looked at my imaging and determined that pre-existing mild degenerative changes contributed substantially to the severity. A stranger decided from behind a desk in an office building somewhere that my spine was partly responsible for breaking itself. The legal process took 14 months. I exhausted my savings in 7. I borrowed against the house in month 9. I settled for 63 cents on the dollar in month 14 because my attorney said continuing to fight would cost more than I'd recover, and I believed him because I was tired in a way that goes past fatigue into something that doesn't have a clean name in English. Modified duty after that, desk work, permit reviews, fire inspection paperwork. For a man who had run into burning buildings for 18 years, sitting under fluorescent lights reviewing building code compliance forms was its own category of damage, the kind you don't capture on an MRI. My wife Renee left 9 months after the injury. Not gradually. Not with the conversations we'd said we'd always have when things got hard, the promise we'd made standing in front of her family and mine in a chapel in Dublin, Ohio 13 years earlier. She left the way water finds the lowest point. Quickly, following the path of least resistance, going where the pressure took her. "You're not the man I married, Nate." She was standing in our bedroom doorway with a duffel bag, and she said it with the quiet certainty of someone who has rehearsed the sentence long enough to say it without flinching. "I can't watch you disappear into yourself." I wanted to ask what she thought watching looked like from where I was standing. I didn't. There's no arguing someone back to a place they've already left. She took primary custody of our son Eli. He was 14 at the time, old enough to understand what was happening and young enough that understanding it didn't help. I got every other weekend and 1 weeknight per week, which in practice meant I saw my son 4 or 5 times a month, and each time I picked him up in the parking lot of the house that used to be mine, sold it to cover the legal costs and Renee's buyout. I had to decide whether to be angry or present, and I always chose present because Eli was watching, and what a 14-year-old boy sees in his father's face becomes part of his understanding of what men do with pain. I moved to Dayton in November, cheaper, far enough from Columbus that I could stop driving past the places that used to mean something. The room above the laundromat on Salem Avenue was $595 a month, and it smelled at all hours like dryer sheets from the machines running below, which should have been comforting but became, after enough weeks, the specific scent of a life that had contracted to the size of a single room. I was driving for a medical courier service, sealed specimens between hospitals, labs, and dialysis centers, $16.40 an hour. I told myself it was still part of the same work. Something in that cooler bag on the passenger seat mattered to someone. Some days I believed it. February 53 in my account, the Edison notice, and Sandra from Be the Match on the phone. I drove to the Wexner Medical Center in Columbus 3 days later for the confirmatory testing. Same process as 12 years before, blood draw, additional typing swabs, paperwork, except this time a technician walked me through the science of what they were confirming, and I sat in a chair and listened to medicine trying to translate itself into regular English. You're potentially a 10 out of 10 HLA match for our patient, she explained. Human leukocyte antigens, they're proteins on your cell surfaces that your immune system uses to distinguish what belongs from what doesn't. For a marrow transplant to succeed, donor and recipient need to match on these markers as precisely as possible. A perfect 10 out of 10 match is rare. It means you could give this patient a real chance. I thought about Kevin's daughter, now 24 years old, living in Cincinnati, working at a veterinary clinic. She'd made it. Someone's swab had found her. Someone had said yes without knowing what they were agreeing to, and a little girl with leukemia had grown into a woman with a life. I want to do it, I said, whatever you need. They drew the blood. I drove back to Dayton. I did 3 courier runs the next day and made $98.40 and ate a gas station sandwich in a hospital parking garage and didn't let myself think too much about anything. 2 weeks later, they called again. This time it wasn't Sandra. Dr. Patricia Ochoa was the director of the HLA typing laboratory at Wexner. She had a calm, precise way of speaking that made everything sound considered rather than urgent, even when what she was saying was neither. She asked me to come back to Columbus. When I asked why, she said, "There's something in your results I want to discuss with you in person." I drove up that afternoon. She met me in a conference room, not an exam room, which I noticed because the distinction means something. Exam rooms are for problems, conference rooms are for conversations. She set a printout on the table between us. "Your match for our patient is confirmed," she said. "We'll move forward with the donation process, but your typing results showed something we were not looking for." "What kind of something?" "Your HLA profile, the specific combination of markers across all 10 loci, is one that our laboratory in 15 years of operation has never encountered in a living donor." She slid the printout closer to me. "We ran your profile against the NMDP International Database. 30 million registered donors worldwide, Mr. Calloway. Your specific combination appears in that database exactly once, in you." I looked at the paper. I couldn't read it. "What does that mean?" "In transplant immunology, we call it a private haplotype. A convergence of markers that emerges from a very specific ancestral lineage, generations of relative genetic isolation producing something the broader population doesn't carry." She leaned forward slightly. "There are patients around the world, people with rare immune conditions and certain genetic disorders, who cannot find compatible donors because their own profiles are so unusual that no standard registry match exists. For some of those patients, your marrow may be the only viable option anywhere on Earth." The room was quiet, the fluorescent hum of a building that never completely turns off. "How many people?" "Currently identified and registered, 19. The actual patient population with conditions that would benefit from your profile is almost certainly larger. People who haven't been typed because their condition has been classified as untreatable." 19 people. I was sitting in a conference room at a medical center in Columbus, Ohio, wearing a Carhartt jacket I'd bought at a Tractor Supply sale rack, with $53 in my checking account and a final notice from Ohio Edison and a room above a laundromat that smelled like other people's clean laundry. I had driven 4 hours round trip in a truck with 218,000 miles on it because a woman named Sandra called and said someone might need me. And now a director of a typing laboratory was telling me that in a database of 30 million people, I was the only one who existed the way I existed. "There's more," Dr. Ochoa said. She set a second document on the table. "Before I tell you what was on it, I need to tell you how bad it actually got, because the number on that page needs to be understood against what came before it, because a number without context is arithmetic. What I need to tell you is not arithmetic. The hardest part wasn't the injury, and it wasn't the legal fight, and it wasn't even losing the house. The hardest part was Eli. My son was 14 when Renee left, and 14 is the worst possible age to lose a household because you're old enough to assign blame and young enough to assign it wrong, and for a while, I don't know exactly how long, he assigned some of it to me. Not all of it, not with words. But I could see it in the way he looked at me when I picked him up, the way a teenage boy looks at a father who has failed to hold something together. Not with hatred, not quite, but with a disappointment that's worse than hatred because it comes from someone who expected more. The first time he came to see the room in Dayton, He stood in the doorway and looked at the water stain on the ceiling above the single window and the air mattress I was still sleeping on because I hadn't bought a bed frame yet and the mini fridge I'd gotten from a Facebook marketplace listing for $40. "Dad," he said it the way teenagers say a parent's title when they're trying to hold themselves together. "I know." "This is." "I know, buddy, I know." He came in anyway. He sat on the edge of the air mattress and looked at the water stain and then looked at me. Eli is tall for 14, taller than I was at that age, with his mother's jaw and my eyes and the particular posture of a kid who's been carrying something heavy and is trying not to let it show. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked. "I'm working on it." "Working on what?" "Getting back to myself." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I know you will. You always do." He said it like he needed it to be true just as much as he needed me to hear it, and I held on to that sentence the same way you hold on to the railing of a staircase when your legs aren't reliable. Not because the railing is strong enough to hold your full weight forever, but because letting go means falling. I held on to it through the courier runs and the Salem Avenue room and the $53 in February and the phone call from Sandra and the drive to Columbus and the conference room where Dr. Patricia Ochoa set the second document on the table. It was a letter, on the letterhead of a biomedical research firm called Helix Covenant Partners, based in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. "Your profile was flagged by our laboratory with your implicit consent as a registry donor for potential research applications," Dr. Ochoa said. "This company develops protocols for transplant immunology and rare immune disorder treatment. They've been looking, in their words, for a living donor with a private haplotype that could serve as the basis for a universal matching model for ultra-rare patient populations." She folded her hands. "They'd like to enter a research agreement with you." I looked at the letter without reading it. "What kind of agreement?" "A long-term participation arrangement, annual testing and sampling over 5 years. Your profile becomes the immunological reference for their research program. It would not require additional major medical procedures beyond what you'd already be doing as a registry donor. In exchange," she paused. "In exchange, they are offering $875,000, payable over 5 years with an upfront signing payment of $210,000. Additionally, they cover all of your medical costs for the duration of the agreement and an extended period afterward." $875,000. I read the number 3 times, then I looked at Dr. Ochoa to see if she was also reading it the same way I was. "I came in here," I said, "because 12 years ago I swabbed my cheek in a fire station break room." "I know." "I'm a courier driver." "I know." "And someone is offering me $875,000. For something that has been in your cells since the day you were born, Mr. Calloway. The value of your biology doesn't change based on what you know about it. It was always exactly what it is. You simply didn't have anyone measure it until today." I sat with that, the way my father used to sit with things, turning them over, looking at them from each angle before deciding where to set them down. "There's one more thing," Dr. Ochoa said, "separate from the research agreement, different from the money." She opened another folder. "When we confirm a private haplotype, we run a comprehensive genetic ancestry panel as part of our documentation protocol. We need to understand the inheritance pathway for a haplotype this unusual, where it comes from, how it was conserved across generations." She looked at the folder. "Mr. Calloway, are you aware of your full biological ancestry?" I told her what I knew, which wasn't much. My parents, my adoptive parents, Frank and Loretta Calloway of Cincinnati, Ohio, had told me when I was 9 that I was adopted through a private agency in 1982. My biological mother was described only as a young woman from out of state. That was everything they knew because it was everything the agency had shared. "Our genetic panel suggests a significant Basque ancestral contribution," Dr. Ochoa said. "The Basque people, indigenous to the border region of northern Spain and southwestern France, have maintained one of the most genetically distinct lineages in Europe. Centuries of relative isolation have produced unique genetic profiles that appear nowhere else with the same frequency, including certain rare immune haplotypes." "Basque," I said. "Your HLA combination is consistent with deep Basque heritage. We cross-referenced your genetic profile against international genealogy databases with your consent as part of the rare haplotype documentation." She set a photograph on the table. "We found a match, a biological relative. A woman named Amaya Chiruca, 67 years old, living in San Sebastian, Spain. Based on the genetic profile, she is most likely your biological mother's sister, your aunt." I stared at the photograph. A woman in her late 60s, standing on what looked like a seawall with the Atlantic behind her. White hair, strong posture, the expression of someone who spends a lot of time looking at water and has made peace with being small next to it. "She has been registered with an international genetic reunion database for several years," Dr. Ochoa said. She has a note attached to her profile. It says she is searching for a relative who was born in the United States in 1982 and placed for adoption. It says her sister asked her before she died to find the child. The room went very quiet. Her sister is gone. She passed in 2021. According to the database note, she came to the United States in 1981 on a student exchange program to the University of Pittsburgh. She was 20 years old. She became pregnant. She was alone in a foreign country with no resources and no family close enough to help. She placed the baby you with an adoption agency in Pittsburgh and returned to Spain. She spent the rest of her life. Dr. Ochoa paused. The note says she never stopped wondering. There is a specific kind of grief for someone you never knew. It doesn't feel like losing a person you remember. It feels like losing a door you didn't know was there, that you might have opened, that you will now never open. And underneath the grief is something else, the knowledge that a woman you never met spent 40 years carrying you with her the way you carry something you can't set down, even when you want to, even when setting it down would be easier, even when you are on the other side of an ocean and there is no practical path back. She spent 40 years thinking about the baby she left in Pittsburgh. And her sister spent 3 years building a profile in a database, hoping a swab taken 12 years ago in a fire station break room would find its way to a computer in Columbus, Ohio. I called the number Dr. Ochoa gave me that evening, sat on the edge of the air mattress in my room on Salem Avenue, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, and dialed a number in Spain. It rang 4 times. International rings sound different, longer, more patient, like the call knows it's crossing an ocean and isn't in a hurry. A woman's voice. Strong but careful, the way you speak when you have been careful for a long time and it has become the default setting. Hello. I'm looking for Amaya Chiruka. My name is Nate Calloway. I'm calling from Dayton, Ohio. A doctor at a medical center here gave me this number. She said you might. The silence that followed lasted only 2 or 3 seconds, but it was the kind of silence that contains years. Nate, she said my name the way you say something you have practiced so many times it no longer sounds like practice. Yes. I have been hoping, she said slowly, her English careful and accented and precise, each word placed like a stone being set into a wall. For a very long time, my sister Itziar, she asked me, she made me promise, to find you. She passed in 2021. Yes, pancreatic cancer, very fast at the end, but she had time to tell me what she needed to tell me. Her voice held. She told me about coming to Pittsburgh, about the university, about being young and far from home and finding herself in a situation she did not know how to manage alone. She told me about the agency and the family in Cincinnati and the boy she had to let go of before she was ready to let go of anything. A breath. She said she thought about you on your birthday every year, every single year. She said she always imagined you building things. She didn't know why. She just believed you were someone who built things. My throat did something I didn't tell it to do. I was a firefighter, I said. Fire captain. I tried to build a career, a family. I didn't. I stopped. I've been in a rough patch. Itziar would say rough patches are where you find out what the stone is made of. I could hear the smile beneath the steadiness. The Basque people have a saying, Haria Hariar and Guinean, stone upon stone. You build slowly. You build from what is already there, even when what is already there looks like rubble. I pressed the phone against my forehead and closed my eyes for a moment. A man 43 years old, sitting on an air mattress above a laundromat, carrying bone marrow worth a research agreement and DNA that connected him to a woman on a seawall in Spain, and a dead woman who spent 40 years lighting a candle with my name on it. Tell me about her, I said. Tell me about Itziar. And she did. She told me her sister was born in 1961 in San Sebastian, the eldest of 4 children, the one who ran toward everything new and foreign and uncertain because she believed that was the only way to find out who you were. She told me Itziar studied literature, loved the sea, cooked in a way that was practically a language, and came back from Pittsburgh not broken but altered, quieter, more private, carrying something she kept mostly to herself. She married a good man. She had 2 daughters. She built a life that was full by any reasonable measure, and every October 4th, my birthday, she went to the church near their childhood home and lit a candle and sat for a while. Every year for 40 years. She said, Amaya told me that whatever she gave you in those 9 months, her blood, her stubbornness, her way of standing up after things knock you down, she hoped it would be enough. I thought about the back injury and the workers' comp fight and the 14 months of legal process and the room on Salem Avenue and the $53 in my checking account and the Edison notice under the coffee mug. Whatever she gave me had carried me through all of it, not gracefully, not without cost, but through. It was enough, I said. I'm still here. The research agreement with Helix Covenant Partners was signed in March. The upfront payment of $210,000 was deposited into an account I opened at a credit union in Dayton, and the first thing I did with any of it was call Ohio Edison and pay the bill. The second thing I did was not quit my courier job. I know that sounds wrong. $875,000 over 5 years, more money than I had earned in the previous 4 years combined, and I kept driving sealed specimen bags between hospitals in a truck with 218,000 miles on it. But my father, Frank Calloway, who ran a plumbing supply company in Cincinnati for 30 years, and who told me when I got my first job at 16 that work is not about what you earn, it's about what you are when you're doing it, would not have understood stopping. And I was not yet far enough from the worst of it to stop without losing something I needed to keep. What I did was move, not far. A 2-bedroom apartment in Columbus, 15 minutes from the neighborhood where Eli was living with Renee. The second bedroom I painted before he saw it, a dark green he'd mentioned wanting once offhand while we were driving past a hardware store. He walked into the room the first time I had him for the weekend and stood very still in the middle of it. You remembered. Of course I did. I said that like 6 months ago. I know. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He was 15 now, an inch taller than the last time I measured him against the doorframe at Renee's. He had the particular combination of softness and hardness that teenage boys carry for a few years before they figure out which one they're going to be. I was hoping he'd figure out he could be both. Dad, he said, what actually happened at the hospital. I told him everything, the typing results, the private haplotype, the 19 patients, the research agreement, and then the part I'd been saving because it needed to be said carefully, the DNA panel, his grandmother Itziar, his great-aunt Amaya on a seawall in San Sebastian. Eli listened the way he listens when something matters to him, without moving, without looking away. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. So I might have it too, he said, the haplotype. Possibly it's heritable, there's a real chance. I want to get tested. We can do that. He looked at me with his mother's jaw in my eyes and something in the expression that I realized was new, a steadiness that hadn't been there 6 months ago, something that looked like the beginning of the man he was working toward. And I want to go to Spain, he said. I want to meet her. Renee found out about the agreement not from me but from her sister, who'd heard it from a mutual friend, who'd heard it from my former crew captain at Station 14, who'd been told by Kurt Hess, my closest friend from the department, who still worked Engine Company 14, in what Kurt has since acknowledged was a failure of discretion but maintains was not entirely his fault. She called me on a Sunday morning. Nate, is it true, the research thing, the money? It's true. How much? I told her. The silence that followed had a specific texture, not the silence of surprise, the silence of recalculation. I've been thinking, she said slowly, that maybe we were too quick to. Renee. I know I said things I shouldn't have. I know I wasn't who you needed me to be when things were hard, but I think if we just... You told me I wasn't the man you married, I said. You packed a bag and left while our son watched. And now that you've heard a number with 6 figures in it, you want to revisit the conversation. I let that sit for a moment. That number doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change what you said in the bedroom doorway. It doesn't change what Eli saw. Nothing about that money reaches back and changes any of that. Nate, I made a mistake. Yes, but the mistake wasn't leaving. The mistake was measuring my value by what I had in the bank and what my job title was, and I'm not going to let you make that mistake again, on either of us. I paused. I'll see Eli next weekend. Goodbye, Renee. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window of my Columbus apartment looking at the street for a while. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, exactly. With the particular calm of a man who has finally understood that the person who told him he wasn't enough was measuring with the wrong instrument the entire time. Kurt came over the night I got back from signing the agreement. He brought a 6-pack of Great Lakes Burning River Pale Ale and a bag of beef jerky and a handshake that turned into the kind of hug men give each other when they've been through things they don't talk about directly but also don't need to. So you're a medical unicorn, he said. I'm a courier driver who donates marrow. A courier driver who is getting paid almost $1 million to donate marrow. Same marrow I've had this whole time. He chewed the jerky, drank his beer, looked at me the way Kurt looks at things, straight at them, no deflection, no performance. Your old man would lose his mind. He would. He'd say something about keeping the job anyway. Because you kept the job? For now. Kurt smiled. It's the smile of someone who knows you well enough to know you're not just keeping a job, you're keeping a version of yourself that you trust. You know what Frank would actually say? What? He'd say the same damn thing he always said, that a man who knows what he's made of doesn't need anyone else to tell him. We sat with that for a while, 2 men in their 40s drinking beer on a Tuesday, the particular kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. We went to Spain in June. I bought the tickets the week the first payment cleared, 2 seats on a direct flight from Columbus to Madrid connecting to Bilbao, and from Bilbao a rental car to San Sebastian, along a coastal road that Eli spent most of the drive photographing on his phone and that I spent most of the drive trying to memorize, because it looked like something that had been there for a very long time and intended to stay. Amaya met us at the entrance to the old part of the city, the Part Vieja. She was smaller in person than in the photograph, or maybe the photograph had given her the sea to stand against and made her seem larger. She had white hair in my forehead, or I have hers. The same broad flat plane above the eyebrows that Frank used to joke made me look like I was always thinking about something structural. She held my face in her hands when she saw me. She was 67 years old, and she had the hands of someone who works with them. Strong, decisive hands, the kind that build and carry and hold. She looked at me the way you look at someone you have constructed in your imagination for years and are now reconciling with the real version. "Itziar's eyes," she said, in English for Eli's benefit. "She had your eyes, or you have hers." Eli stood slightly behind me, hands in his pockets, 15 and uncertain and trying to figure out where to put himself in a moment like this. Amaya turned to him. "And you," she studied him for a moment, "you have your father's forehead and someone else's chin." "My mom's," Eli said. "She must be very beautiful." Eli blinked. "She is," he said, "because he is his father's son and was raised to be fair." We spent 4 days in San Sebastian. Amaya's apartment was in the newer part of the city, 2 blocks from the water, up a set of stairs that my back reminded me about each morning and that I climbed anyway. She cooked for us every night, food that tasted like it had accumulated meaning over decades, recipes carried from her mother and her mother's mother and further back than that, into the kind of time that becomes identity. Eli ate 3 servings of bacalao on the second night and asked her to write down the recipe, and she laughed with her whole body the way certain people do when something delights them completely. She showed us photographs of Itziar, childhood photographs, the 2 sisters on a beach. A young woman with long dark hair standing in front of the University of Pittsburgh's Cathedral of Learning, squinting in the October sun, October 1981, the year before I was born, the year she arrived in a country that was not hers, the year she started carrying something she would carry for the rest of her life. I sat with that photograph for a long time. She was 20 years old, the same age as some of the firefighters I'd trained, young enough that I sometimes had to remind myself they were adults. 20 years old, alone in Pittsburgh in the fall, and making a decision about a life that wasn't entirely hers to make. She was brave, I said. She was terrified, Amaya said, but yes, both things were true. On the 3rd day, Eli got tested at a medical facility in Bilbao that Dr. Ochoa had connected us with through the International Registry Network. The results came back the following morning. He has the haplotype. Not identical to mine, the specific combination differs slightly, which the doctor said was consistent with inheritance patterns, but close enough to be registered, close enough to matter, close enough that a 15-year-old boy with his mother's jaw and my eyes and his great-aunt's cooking recipes in his phone is now listed in the International Bone Marrow Registry as a potential donor for patients who have no one else. "Dad," he said when the doctor explained the results, "does this mean I can donate, like actually help someone?" "When you're old enough, yes." He thought about that with the particular seriousness of a 15-year-old who is starting to understand that the world is larger than his immediate life and that he has some responsibility for the larger parts. "I want to. When I'm old enough, I want to be registered." "You already are," I said. "You have been since this morning." He looked at me. Then he looked at Amaya, who had come with us to the appointment and who was now standing by the window of the consultation room with a kind of composure that is built, not born. "She would have loved you," Amaya said to him. "She would have loved you so much." Eli nodded slowly. He didn't try to speak right away. He just looked at the window, at the city outside, at whatever a 15-year-old boy sees when he is figuring out that he belongs to something bigger than he knew. "I am back in Columbus now. The courier job ends next month, not because I need the income, but because the Wexner Medical Center offered me a position in their community health liaison program, working with patients navigating the bone marrow registry process, the paperwork, the fear, the waiting. The same things I navigated, except I wasn't navigating them with anyone helping me, and now I can be the person I didn't have. It pays less than what I earned as a courier, it matters more. The apartment has pictures on the walls now. A photograph from San Sebastian, Amaya and Eli standing on the seawall with the Atlantic behind them, laughing at something Eli said that I didn't quite catch in time to photograph the moment before the laughter. I have it framed above the kitchen table. And a photograph of Itziar, young, 20 years old, standing in front of the Cathedral of Learning in October 1981, squinting into the sun. I have it framed in the hallway, near the door I walk out every morning. I don't have a word for what it means to look at someone you never met and recognize something. Not a resemblance, exactly, something deeper than resemblance. The sense that what you are built from was built somewhere specific by specific people over specific centuries, and that it traveled a very long distance to arrive in your particular body. She spent 40 years lighting candles. The last one is still burning, I can feel it. My father Frank used to say that you don't know what a thing is worth until you understand what it cost. The back, the legal fight, the house, Renee in the doorway with the duffel bag, the room above the laundromat and the $53 and the Edison notice, and Eli standing in the middle of a strange room trying to figure out if his father was going to be okay. It cost everything I had, and what I had, it turned out, was more than I knew. I had Marrow that 19 people in the world were waiting for without knowing I existed. I had a great aunt on a seawall in Spain who had been keeping her promise to a sister for 3 years. I had a son who asked to be put on the registry the morning he found out he could be. And I had, it turns out, the same thing I've always had, the ability to walk into a situation that is beyond me, take stock of what is there, and begin, stone upon stone, to build. The world needs people who build things. I'm still one of them, I just finally know what I'm made of.